For a while, it felt like the Marvel Cinematic Universe had finally found its next Thanos. Not another alien warlord, not another god with unlimited power, but someone far more dangerous. A man who understood time itself better than anyone else alive. A villain who didn't need magic, infinity stones, or cosmic luck. He only needed one thing: the ability to arrive before you ever knew he existed. That idea alone should have made Kang the most terrifying enemy the Avengers had ever faced. Because how do you defeat someone who has already watched every possible outcome before the battle even begins? Yet somehow the promise of Kang slowly disappeared. Every new appearance raised more questions than excitement. Instead of one unstoppable conqueror, audiences were introduced to countless versions of the same person. Every variant came with different motivations, different personalities, and different levels of power. At first, that sounded like an exciting expansion of Marvel's Multiverse Saga. But over time, something unexpected happened. The more Kangs we met, the less important Kang himself became. Every defeat was immediately softened by the existence of another variant waiting somewhere else. Every victory felt temporary. Every death felt meaningless. The audience stopped fearing Kang because Marvel unintentionally taught us that there was always another one. And once a villain becomes replaceable, he immediately stops feeling inevitable. That's the tragedy of Kang the Conqueror. Because if you go back to Marvel Comics, you'll realize this character was never built around the idea of infinite copies. Kang's greatest strength was never simply existing across multiple universes. His greatest weapon was time. He's a human being from the 31st century who mastered technology so advanced that earlier civilizations would mistake it for magic. He doesn't conquer planets because he's physically stronger than everyone else. He conquers history itself. Kingdoms fall because he arrives centuries before anyone expects him. Entire civilizations rise and collapse according to plans he designed generations earlier. His battles aren't fought in one place, they're fought across centuries. That single concept makes Kang fundamentally different from nearly every major Marvel villain. Thanos wanted balance. Ultron wanted evolution. Loki wanted a throne. But Kang wants ownership over history itself. He doesn't simply rule people. He decides which versions of reality deserve to exist. Every war becomes his battlefield, because every era belongs to him. And that's exactly why so many comic readers consider him one of the Avengers' greatest enemies. Not because he punches harder than everyone else, but because every choice the heroes make can already be part of his design. Ironically, the MCU already had the perfect opportunity to build this version of Kang years before audiences even knew his name. Think back to Avengers Endgame. Most people remember the emotional ending, Tony Stark's sacrifice, Steve Rogers dancing with Peggy, the portals opening for the final battle. But underneath all those unforgettable moments was something much bigger. Endgame permanently changed the rules of the MCU by introducing time travel. For the first time, Earth's mightiest heroes proved that history could be manipulated. They entered the past. They removed Infinity Stones from different eras. They interacted with people who were never supposed to meet them. Even though the film carefully explained branching timelines, one uncomfortable question quietly remained in the background. What happens when humanity learns that time isn't untouchable anymore? Marvel answered that question with TVA, Loki, branching realities, incursions, and endless variants. But imagine if they had taken a completely different path. Imagine if the moment Tony Stark solved time travel, someone in the distant future noticed. Not a god, not a cosmic entity. Just another human. A human who realized that one invention had permanently broken the natural order of history. Suddenly, Kang doesn't need to appear from nowhere. He becomes the consequence of everything the Avengers believed was their greatest victory. Tony saved the universe, but unknowingly created the technology that would eventually allow history itself to be conquered. That's the kind of poetic storytelling Marvel has always done at its best. The greatest victories often create the greatest future disasters. The Avengers defeat one enemy only to accidentally give birth to another. Now imagine taking that idea one step further. Instead of making Kang feel disconnected from Earth's heroes, What if he carried Tony Stark's legacy in the darkest possible way? Not necessarily as Tony's direct descendant in the traditional sense, but as someone whose entire civilization exists because of Stark's breakthrough. Every advancement in his century traces back to one invention: the moment Tony proved time could be engineered. To Kang, Tony wouldn't simply be Iron Man, he would be the father of an entirely new scientific age, a man who accidentally handed humanity the keys to history. That instantly transforms Kang into something much more personal. Because now every new Avenger isn't just fighting another villain, they're fighting the consequences of their predecessors' choices. Sam Wilson would inherit Steve Rogers' shield while carrying the burden of decisions Steve never even knew he was making. Peter Parker would continue Tony Stark's legacy only to discover that Stark's greatest invention eventually created humanity's greatest tyrant. Shuri would witness a future where even Wakanda's technological brilliance becomes insignificant compared to civilizations thousands of years ahead. Shang-Chi would slowly realize that ancient artifacts may have been influencing history far longer than anyone imagined. Every hero suddenly shares responsibility for a future they never intended to create. That's infinitely more compelling than simply announcing another multiversal threat. Because audiences connect with consequences. Every unforgettable Marvel story has consequences. Civil War existed because of Age of Ultron. Infinity War happened because Loki failed. Endgame existed because Infinity War succeeded. The best MCU stories always feel connected by choices rather than random events. Kang should have continued that tradition instead of feeling like a completely separate storyline happening beside everything else. And here's where the emotional weight becomes even stronger. One of the biggest problems with modern multiverse storytelling is that death slowly loses its meaning. Whenever a beloved character dies, audiences immediately ask one question: can another version replace them? Once infinite realities exist, every emotional goodbye starts feeling negotiable. Somewhere, another Iron Man probably exists. Somewhere, another Black Widow survived. Somewhere, another Captain America never retired. The possibilities become endless. And unfortunately, endless possibilities often reduce emotional stakes. Time travel doesn't have that problem. Time creates responsibility. Every decision matters because history remembers it. You can't simply replace your past. You have to live with it. That's why stories centered around time often feel more human than stories centered around the multiverse. They force characters to confront regret instead of escape it. They ask impossible questions. If you could prevent tragedy, should you? If changing history saves one person but destroys millions you've never met, is it still the right choice? If you erase your greatest mistake, do you also erase the person that mistake turned you into? Those are exactly the kinds of moral dilemmas Kang should force the Avengers to face. Because Kang doesn't simply attack cities. He attacks memories, he attacks history, he attacks identity. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that every victory you've ever celebrated has quietly disappeared from history because someone changed the timeline centuries earlier. That kind of villain doesn't just threaten the future. He steals the meaning of the past. And once you begin looking at Kang through that lens, an entirely different Avengers movie starts taking shape. Instead of heroes jumping randomly between universes filled with alternate versions of familiar characters, every journey through time would uncover another missing piece of one enormous mystery. Every historical era would reveal evidence that Kang had been manipulating civilization long before Earth's heroes were ever assembled. Ancient myths would no longer seem like myths at all. Forgotten kingdoms would suddenly contain impossible technology. Legendary rulers would begin resembling people we've already met. And little by little, the Avengers would realize something terrifying. They were never chasing Kang. They had been living inside his timeline all along. Next. The deeper that realization sinks in, the more terrifying Kang becomes. Because once history itself is compromised, every mystery the MCU has left unanswered suddenly has a place in the same story. Instead of feeling like disconnected franchises spread across dozens of movies and series, everything begins to look like pieces of a timeline that someone has been quietly arranging for centuries. And that's where Marvel could completely redefine what an Avengers movie looks like. Instead of asking, which universe are we visiting next, the question becomes, which moment in history has already been changed? That shift sounds small, but it changes the emotional core of the entire saga. The heroes are no longer tourists exploring alternate realities. They're investigators trying to repair the damage done to the one history that actually belongs to them. The perfect way to begin that journey would be with a version of Kang nobody expects to become a hero. Comic readers know him as Iron Lad, one of the most fascinating versions of Nathaniel Richards ever created. Unlike the ruthless conqueror destined to dominate history, Iron Lad is still young enough to believe that the future isn't written yet. He knows exactly what he is supposed to become, and that knowledge terrifies him. Imagine introducing him not as another surprise cameo, but as a desperate teenager running away from his own destiny. He arrives in the present carrying technology centuries beyond anything Wakanda, Stark Industries, or Reed Richards have ever imagined. Naturally, nobody trusts him. Why would they? Every scan identifies him as Kang. Every warning tells the Avengers they're looking at the same man responsible for destroying history. Yet standing in front of them isn't a conqueror. It's a frightened kid asking them to help him become someone else. That immediately creates a conflict no amount of CGI destruction ever could. Do you judge someone by the future they're destined to create? Or by the choices they're making today? That's a question every Avenger would answer differently. And that's exactly the kind of character-driven conflict the franchise has always handled best. Sam Wilson would probably be the first to believe that people deserve the chance to choose their own future. His entire journey as Captain America has been built around earning a legacy instead of inheriting one. Peter Parker would understand Iron Lad better than almost anyone because he knows what it's like to carry expectations left behind by someone greater than himself. Shuri would immediately become fascinated by the technology Iron Lad brings from the future, while also recognizing the danger of knowledge arriving before humanity is ready for it. Carol Danvers might argue that eliminating one teenager today could save trillions tomorrow. Bruce Banner would see another brilliant young mind crushed beneath impossible expectations. Suddenly, the Avengers aren't debating strategy. They're debating destiny itself. And while they argue over what Iron Lad deserves, Kang has already moved on to the next phase of his plan. Because the terrifying thing about a true master of time is that he never fights on a single battlefield. He attacks every era simultaneously. Imagine one team of heroes discovering impossible readings around the 10 rings. Another receives reports that ancient Egyptian ruins have begun rewriting themselves overnight. Wakanda detects mysterious energy signatures buried beneath forgotten cities older than recorded civilization. Meanwhile, strange broadcasts begin arriving from centuries that haven't happened yet. None of these events appear connected. At first, they look like separate missions assigned to different Avengers. But eventually, one pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Every anomaly exists at a point in history where Kang once ruled under a different identity. That's when Marvel finally gets to explore one of the most fascinating aspects of Kang from the comics without making the audience feel overwhelmed. Instead of introducing every variant as another interchangeable villain, each identity becomes another chapter in one man's life. Ra-Metut isn't just another Kang. He's Kang's first successful conquest. The pharaoh who ruled ancient Egypt using technology thousands of years ahead of its time. Suddenly, Moon Knight's mythology collides naturally with the Avengers. Mark Spector has spent his life fighting gods, curses, and ancient legends. Then he discovers that one of Egypt's greatest rulers wasn't blessed by the gods at all. He was a scientist from the 31st century, pretending to be one. Every monument, every impossible piece of architecture, every unexplained advancement in civilization suddenly takes on a completely different meaning. History wasn't miraculous. It was manipulated. Now imagine Moon Knight walking through ancient Egypt expecting mythology, only to find futuristic machinery buried beneath pyramids that haven't even been completed yet. Imagine Khonshu himself realizing that another force has been interfering with humanity's destiny long before the gods understood what was happening. That single revelation expands Moon Knight's world while strengthening Kang's influence at the same time. Nobody loses their identity. Instead, both stories become larger because they're connected through history rather than coincidence. Then the story pushes even further into the past. The Avengers discover that Ra-Metut wasn't searching ancient Egypt for power. He was searching for someone. a young mutant whose abilities were centuries ahead of humanity's evolution. Someone history would eventually remember as Apocalypse. That connection already exists in Marvel lore, but inside the MCU, it could become the bridge that introduces mutants without feeling forced. Imagine Apocalypse as a young survivor in an unforgiving civilization, fascinated by impossible technology left behind by Rah-Ma-Tut. He doesn't fully understand it, but he learns enough to realize that evolution isn't limited to biology. Technology can accelerate destiny just as easily as genetics. Suddenly, Apocalypse's obsession with survival gains an entirely new layer. He isn't simply preaching that only the strong deserve to live. He's following lessons unknowingly inherited from the greatest conqueror time has ever produced. Notice how naturally the mutant storyline begins growing out of Kang's timeline instead of appearing from nowhere. That's the beauty of a history-based narrative. Every new discovery feels like something that was always waiting beneath the surface. Nothing has to be retconned. Nothing feels randomly inserted. The audience simply realizes they were missing information all along. While one group investigates the distant past, another travels toward the future, hoping to learn how Kang ultimately wins. And this is where the MCU could finally deliver something fans have wanted for years, a future that genuinely feels hopeless. Not another city floating in the sky. Not another army invading Earth. A civilization that has already surrendered. Towering structures stretch above abandoned landscapes while automated drones patrol silent streets. Entire generations have grown up believing freedom is a myth because nobody alive remembers a time before Kang ruled history. Museums no longer preserve humanity's achievements. They preserve Kang's victories. School children learn that resistance never existed because history itself has been rewritten to erase anyone who opposed him. Then, somewhere inside that broken future, the Avengers encounter someone they never expected to see. An old Wolverine. Not the fearless warrior audiences first met decades ago, but a survivor carrying the exhaustion of centuries. His healing factor kept him alive long enough to witness civilization collapse again and again. Every rebellion failed. Every alliance eventually fractured. Friends died. Families disappeared. Entire nations vanished from rewritten timelines. Yet Logan remains, because history itself can't quite figure out how to erase him completely. He's become less of a man and more of a scar left behind by time. The first thing he tells the Avengers isn't a warning about Kang's strength. It's something far more haunting. You still think you're early. That single sentence changes everything, because it suggests Kang didn't just conquer the future. He conquered it long before the Avengers ever realized there was a war to fight. Logan's words wouldn't sound dramatic because of how they were delivered. They would hit because of what they implied. Every decision the Avengers believed they were making freely may have already been anticipated centuries ago. Kang wasn't reacting to the heroes. The heroes had been reacting to Kang all along. That's the terrifying advantage of someone who experiences history differently than everyone else. To us, time is a straight line. To Kang, it's a battlefield he can walk across in any direction. The past isn't gone. The future isn't unknown. They're simply locations. And if that's true, then every victory the Avengers celebrate becomes suspicious. Did they actually win? Or were they allowed to? That question slowly begins consuming the team. Sam Wilson starts wondering whether Captain America was ever supposed to inherit the shield. Peter can't stop thinking about Tony Stark. If Kang's entire civilization grew from Stark's discovery of time travel, then Iron Man didn't just save the universe. He unknowingly built the foundation of its greatest nightmare. Peter has spent years trying to honor Tony's legacy, but what happens when that legacy includes the birth of history's most dangerous tyrant? It's a burden no one should have to carry. Shuri faces a similar realization when future records reveal that Wakandan technology eventually becomes one of the key components Kang uses to stabilize his empire across centuries. Wakanda always believed its greatest responsibility was protecting its knowledge. But what if preserving that knowledge also guaranteed a future where it would be weaponized on a scale beyond imagination? None of these heroes are guilty, yet every one of them feels responsible. And that's exactly what makes Kang different from every villain before him. He doesn't just attack the world. He forces the heroes to question whether the future they're protecting is actually worth saving. Meanwhile, Iron Lad becomes the emotional center of the story without anyone noticing it at first. Every time the Avengers discover another atrocity committed by Kang, they instinctively look at the young boy standing beside them. He carries the same face, the same mind, the same potential. Some members begin seeing him as proof that destiny cannot be escaped. Others see him as the only chance history has left. Even Iron Lad starts questioning himself. How do you fight someone who is literally your future? Every lesson he learns from the Avengers makes him stronger. But every improvement also brings him one step closer to becoming the conqueror he fears. He begins wondering whether every act of kindness is simply another stage in Kang's evolution. Maybe Kang remembers all of this because Kang already lived through it. Maybe every conversation, every friendship, every sacrifice has already happened once before. If that's true, then can free will even exist? Those doubts become even more dangerous when Kang finally steps out of the shadows. Not with a massive invasion, not with thousands of variants surrounding him, but completely alone. That's the version of Kang audiences should have met from the beginning. Calm, patient, almost disappointed. He doesn't scream, he doesn't threaten anyone. He simply walks into the room as though the outcome has already been decided. The Avengers prepare for battle, but Kang barely acknowledges them. His eyes remain fixed on Iron Lad. For a long moment, neither of them speaks. Then Kang smiles, not because he's winning, but because he's remembering. He has lived this conversation before. Every question Iron Lad is about to ask, Kang once asked himself. Every promise the Avengers are making, Kang once believed them too. And with terrifying confidence, he says something that silences the entire room. You don't become me because you fail. He pauses. You become me because you succeed. That's the kind of line that completely reframes the story. Suddenly, the audience realizes Kang was never created by hatred alone. He was created by hope. Every attempt to save the timeline, every effort to prevent suffering, every impossible choice that demanded sacrificing one life to save billions, over decades, then centuries. Then millennia. Compassion slowly transformed into control. Kang didn't wake up one day wanting to rule history. He reached the horrifying conclusion that history could only survive if someone finally stopped trusting humanity to make its own decisions. In his mind, freedom isn't beautiful. Freedom is what causes endless wars, broken timelines, incursions, and civilizations collapsing under the weight of their own mistakes. Every conquest is simply another correction. Every dictatorship is another timeline prevented from destroying itself. And for the first time, the Avengers can't immediately dismiss his logic. Because they've seen the damage. They've watched timelines fracture. They've watched universes collide. They've watched entire realities disappear. Kang isn't lying. He's just reached a conclusion no hero is willing to accept. That's what separates unforgettable villains from forgettable ones. They're not monsters because they're wrong. They're monsters because they believe they're the only ones willing to do what's necessary. The final battle, then, shouldn't revolve around destroying a machine or stopping another beam shooting into the sky. It should revolve around one impossible decision. Kang reveals that the timeline has reached a breaking point. Every century they've visited has weakened reality further. The only permanent solution is to erase the event that started everything, Tony Stark's invention of time travel. Remove that discovery from history, and Kang is never born. His empire never exists. Countless tragedies disappear before they ever happen. But there's a cost. If Tony never discovers time travel, then the time heist never happens. The Infinity Stones are never recovered. Thanos wins. 5 years never end. Billions remain dead forever. Suddenly, the Avengers face the greatest moral dilemma in MCU history. Save the future or preserve the past. Erase Kang or erase Endgame. There isn't a perfect answer because both choices demand unimaginable sacrifice. This is where every legacy of the Infinity Saga finally collides with the future of the MCU. Steve Rogers' faith, Tony Stark's genius, Natasha's sacrifice, Bruce Banner's hope. Everything comes down to one question. Is history something we protect or something we rewrite? The answer ultimately comes from the one person everyone expected to become the next conqueror, Iron Lad. He finally understands the mistake that creates Kang. It isn't time travel itself. It isn't technology. It isn't knowledge. It's believing that one person deserves complete control over everyone else's future. Kang spent his entire existence trying to eliminate uncertainty, because uncertainty creates pain. But uncertainty also creates courage. It creates love. It creates sacrifice. It creates heroes. Iron Lad refuses to inherit a future built on absolute control. Instead of replacing Kang, he rejects him. Instead of ruling history, he chooses to trust it, and in doing so, he breaks the cycle that has repeated across centuries. Kang isn't defeated because someone overpowers him. He's defeated because the future finally makes a different choice. That's the ending Kang always believed was impossible. With Kang gone, the damage to the timeline doesn't magically disappear. History carries scars that can never be completely healed. Tiny changes remain scattered throughout different eras, quietly setting up the next generation of stories. Ancient Egypt still remembers whispers of impossible technology. Somewhere in the distant future, legends survive about a group of heroes who refuse to surrender history to one man. Mutants begin emerging naturally, not because another universe crashed into Earth, but because history has finally returned to the path it was always meant to follow. The X-Men no longer feel like visitors entering someone else's franchise. They feel like a forgotten chapter of the same world finally revealing itself. And that's why Kang still deserves another chance in the MCU. Not because Marvel needs another multiversal villain. Not because audiences want more timelines. But because Kang represents something far more timeless than either of those ideas. He's the embodiment of humanity's oldest temptation. The belief that if we could just control tomorrow, we'd finally stop suffering. The Avengers prove the opposite. The future isn't something that should be conquered, it's something that should be earned. If you enjoyed this new vision for Kang the Conqueror and want to see more deep Marvel breakdowns and cinematic rewrites like this, make sure to like the video, share it with another Marvel fan, and subscribe to FILMCAST so you don't miss the next one. And if you really loved this video and want to support the channel, consider sending a $25 super thanks. It truly helps us keep creating bigger and better content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.